sometimes the cruelest wounds come wrapped in the guise of friendship, delivered by hands we trusted to heal rather than harm. This is one such story, a tale of misplaced trust, devastating betrayal, and ultimately, the fierce reclamation of one's dignity. It's about learning that some secrets are too precious to share, and some people are too careless to deserve them. My name is Cordelia Ashworth, and I used to believe that friendship meant sanctuary. I used to think that when you found someone who truly understood you, you'd found a treasure worth more than gold. How spectacularly wrong I was. It was a Tuesday evening in October when my world began to unravel, though I wouldn't realize it for weeks. The autumn rain was hammering against the windows of my flat in Camden, and I was curled up on my sofa with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. My phone buzzed, a text from Imogen. Fancy a chat? I'm having wine and feeling philosophical. Come round. Imogen Blackwood had been my closest friend since university. We'd met during Freshers' Week, both of us hiding behind books in the corner of a party neither of us wanted to attend. She was studying literature while I pursued psychology, and we bonded over our shared love of Virginia Woolf and our mutual disdain for small talk. For 3 years, we'd been inseparable. Study partners, confidants, each other's emergency contact. I threw on my coat and made the short walk to her Victorian terrace in Primrose Hill. The house always smelled of vanilla candles and expensive perfume, a stark contrast to my humble flat. Imogen came from money. Old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted its presence. She answered the door with her characteristic smile, all white teeth and perfectly applied lipstick despite the late hour. Her auburn hair was pulled back in that effortlessly elegant way that only seemed to work for women who'd never had to worry about anything more pressing than which charity gala to attend. "Darling!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of Chanel and Sauvignon Blanc. "Perfect timing. I've just opened a bottle of that wine you love." Her sitting room was exactly as I expected. All cream sofas and coffee table books, with fresh flowers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. We settled onto her sofa, wine glasses in hand, and fell into our usual rhythm of conversation. She told me about her latest romantic drama, something involving a barrister named Rupert who couldn't decide between her and his ex-wife. I found myself only half listening, my mind elsewhere. "You're quiet tonight," Imogen observed, tucking her legs beneath her. "Everything all right?" And that's when I made the mistake that would haunt me for months to come. Perhaps it was the wine, or the soft lighting, or simply the overwhelming need to share the burden I'd been carrying alone. Whatever it was, I opened my mouth and let my deepest secret spill out. "Actually, there's something I've been meaning to tell someone. Something I've never told anyone before." Imogen leaned forward, her green eyes bright with interest. "You know you can tell me anything, darling. What is it?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 3 years' silence pressing against my chest. "It's about my father. About why he really left when I was 16. The official story had always been simple. My parents had grown apart, decided they wanted different things, parted amicably. It was neat, tidy, and completely false. The truth was far more complicated, far more painful. "He had an affair," I said quietly, staring into my wine glass. "But that's not the worst part. The woman he was seeing. She was my best friend from school. Tabitha. She was 17. I'd brought her home for dinner countless times. She'd slept over in my bedroom, borrowed my clothes, helped me with my homework." Imogen's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, Cordelia." I caught them together in our garden shed one afternoon when I came home early from college. She was still in her school uniform. The memory made my stomach churn even now, years later. When I confronted my father, he begged me not to tell my mother. Said it would destroy her. So I kept quiet, watched him pack his bags and leave, let everyone believe it was a mutual decision. "But surely your mother deserved to know the truth?" I shook my head. Mum was already fragile. She'd been battling depression for years, and I couldn't bear to add this to her burden. So I carried it alone. The guilt of knowing, the anger at him for putting me in that position, the betrayal of losing both my father and my best friend in one awful moment. Tears were streaming down my face now, the first I'd shed over this in months. Imogen reached over and squeezed my hand. "Darling, I had no idea you'd been carrying something so heavy. Thank you for trusting me with this. I promise it goes no further." Those words. "I promise it goes no further." They echoed in my mind as I walked home that night, feeling lighter than I had in years. Finally someone knew. Finally, I wasn't alone with this secret. If only I'd known that promises, like hearts, are so easily broken. 3 weeks passed in blissful ignorance. I threw myself into my work at the mental health charity where I'd recently started as a counselor, finding purpose in helping others navigate their own emotional landscapes. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days encouraging people to open up about their traumas while I'd spent years burying my own. It was a Friday afternoon when the first crack in my newfound peace appeared. I was in the staff kitchen making coffee when my colleague Fenella approached, her expression unusually serious. "Cordelia, can I have a word?" Fenella Whitmore was in her 50s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. She'd been at the charity for over a decade and had become something of a mentor to me since I'd started 6 months earlier. "Of course," I said, following her to a quiet corner of the break room. She glanced around, ensuring we were alone before speaking. "I'm not sure how to bring this up, but I thought you should know. I was at a dinner party last weekend in Hampstead. You know how these charity circles overlap, and I overheard something that troubled me." My stomach clenched with sudden dread. "What kind of something?" "There were people discussing your family situation. Very personal details about your father and, well, about what happened when you were at college. I wouldn't normally repeat gossip, but the way they were talking about it, as if it were common knowledge." She trailed off, her face flushed with embarrassment. The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the tiled floor in an explosion of ceramic and hot liquid. The sound seemed to echo in my ears as the full implication of her words sank in. "Who was saying these things?" I whispered. Fenella looked genuinely distressed. "I'm so sorry, dear." I recognized one voice. Imogen Blackwood. She was holding court at the dinner table, talking about how tragic it all was, how you'd been protecting your mother all these years. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, my vision blurring at the edges. "Are you certain it was her?" "I'm afraid so. I've met her at several charity functions. Her family are major donors to various causes." She was speaking with such authority, such intimate detail. Fenella placed a gentle hand on my arm. "I take it this wasn't common knowledge." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. 3 weeks. It had taken exactly 3 weeks for my deepest secret to become dinner party entertainment. "Cordelia, are you all right? You look quite pale." I forced myself to nod, to bend down and begin collecting the pieces of broken cup with shaking hands. "I'm fine. Just clumsy. Thank you for telling me." But I wasn't fine. As I drove home that evening, my mind raced through every possible explanation, every excuse I could make for Imogen. Perhaps she'd been trying to help, seeking advice from friends. Perhaps she'd been drinking and it had slipped out accidentally. Perhaps there was some reasonable explanation for why my most private pain was now being discussed over canapes in North London drawing rooms. By the time I reached my flat, I'd almost convinced myself it was all a misunderstanding. Then I checked my phone and found 17 missed calls, 12 text messages, and 43 notifications on social media. The messages were a mixture of concern, curiosity, and barely concealed excitement. Old friends from university, colleagues from previous jobs, even people I barely knew were reaching out with variations of the same theme. "Just heard about your dad. So sorry you went through that alone. Can't believe what happened with your friend from school. How awful. Why didn't you ever tell me about your father's affair? I had no idea." My secret, the burden I'd carried in silence for 7 years, was trending in my social circle like a particularly juicy episode of a soap opera. I felt sick, violated, exposed in the most fundamental way possible. I called Imogen immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I sent a text. "We need to talk. Please call me." No response. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our conversation 3 weeks earlier. I remembered the way her eyes had lit up when I began sharing my secret, the almost hungry way she'd leaned forward to catch every word. Had I misread concern for curiosity? Had her sympathy been genuine, or was I just another source of entertainment? The questions tormented me until dawn, but no answers came. Only the growing certainty that everything I believed about friendship, about trust, about Imogen herself, had been a lie. The weekend passed in a blur of unanswered phone calls and increasing panic. By Monday morning, it was clear that my personal business had become public property. The details were everywhere, embellished, dramatized, and passed along like currency in the social marketplace. I'd always prided myself on being a private person, someone who kept her emotional cards close to her chest. Now I felt like I was walking around naked, every painful detail of my past on display for public consumption. It was my colleague Jasper who finally provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. Jasper Thornberry was the charity's communications director, a sharp-dressed man in his 30s with an encyclopedic knowledge of London's social scene and an unfortunate talent for gossip himself. "Darling, you look absolutely dreadful," he said, cornering me in the lift Monday afternoon. "All this business with your family, it's such a shame it's gotten out like this." "You've heard about it too?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Heard about it?" "Sweetheart, it's been the talk of every dinner party north of the river. That friend of yours really knows how to tell a story." My blood ran cold. Which friend? Imogen Blackwood, of course. Though I have to say, I'm surprised she shared something so personal. She's usually quite discreet about these things. He paused, studying my expression. "Wait, you didn't give her permission to spread this around, did you?" The lift reached our floor, but I made no move to get out. "Tell me exactly what you've heard, and where you heard it." Jasper's expression shifted from casual interest to genuine concern. "Cordelia, I'm starting to think I shouldn't have. Please. I need to know." He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Right. Well, it started at the Ashfords' dinner party last Tuesday. Imogen was there with that barrister she's been seeing. Rupert something. Apparently, she told the whole table about your situation, really went into detail about the affair, your friend from school, how you'd been protecting your mother." Tuesday. One day after my conversation with Fenella. Less than a week after I'd confided in Imogen. "But that wasn't the end of it," Jasper continued, clearly warming to his subject now. "She brought it up again at the gallery opening on Thursday. You know, that new space in Shoreditch? Must have told a dozen people. Very dramatic presentation, apparently. Really played up the tragic angle. My vision started to blur. She told people at a gallery opening? And then there was the charity lunch on Saturday. Half the committee heard about it then. I have to admit, the way she tells it, it's quite compelling. Very sad, very human. But still." He trailed off, finally seeming to register my horror. "Oh dear. You didn't know she was doing this, did you?" I stumbled out of the lift and made it to the bathroom just in time to be violently sick. As I knelt on the cold tiles, retching into the toilet bowl, the full scope of Imogen's betrayal became clear. This hadn't been an accidental slip or a moment of poor judgment. She had systematically, deliberately, repeatedly shared my most private pain with anyone who would listen. But why? Over the next few days, I began to piece together the answer through careful questioning of mutual friends and acquaintances. The picture that emerged was both shocking and, in retrospect, entirely predictable. Imogen had always been the center of attention in our friendship, the one with the dramatic love affairs and family scandals. But lately, her well of interesting stories had run dry. Rupert the barrister was turning out to be disappointingly stable, her family drama had cooled, and she'd found herself competing for social relevance in circles where she'd once reigned supreme. My secret had been a godsend, a fresh, tragic tale that positioned her as the compassionate friend privy to deeply personal information. She'd weaponized my pain, turning it into social currency that bought her attention, sympathy, and most importantly, a return to the center of every conversation. I thought about all the times over the years when Imogen had pumped me for information about other people, the way her eyes would light up when she sensed a secret or scandal brewing. I'd always assumed she was just naturally curious, perhaps a bit too interested in gossip but essentially harmless. Now I realized I'd been systematically groomed, my trust earned and cultivated so that when the moment came, I would hand over something valuable enough to fund her social resurrection. The revelation should have brought clarity, but instead it brought a rage so pure and consuming that it frightened me. For days, I walked around in a haze of fury, planning confrontations that would expose her as thoroughly as she'd exposed me. I imagined public scenes, dramatic revelations, devastating takedowns that would leave her as humiliated as I felt. But Imogen, it seemed, had anticipated this. She'd made herself completely unreachable, Phone calls went to voicemail, texts remained unread, emails bounced back. Her social media had gone quiet, and mutual friends reported that she'd gone to stay with relatives in the Cotswolds. She'd lit the fire and then fled the scene, leaving me to deal with the aftermath alone. The weeks that followed were among the darkest of my life. The constant scrutiny, the pitying looks, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room, it all became unbearable. My work suffered as I struggled to concentrate on my clients' problems when my own felt overwhelming. The worst part was the way people tried to be helpful. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out with advice about family therapy, trauma counseling, and healing from parental betrayal. They meant well, but each conversation felt like another violation. Another reminder that my private business was now public property. "You should write a book," suggested my cousin Beatrice over lunch one day. Memoirs are very popular now, especially ones dealing with family secrets and teenage trauma. "Everyone's talking about how brave you are for protecting your mother all these years," added another friend. "It's really quite inspiring." Inspiring. As if my years of silence and pain had been a conscious choice to be admired rather than a terrified teenager's desperate attempt to keep her family from completely falling apart. The hardest part was facing my mother. She called on a Thursday evening, her voice tight with hurt and confusion. "Cordelia, love, I've been getting some very strange phone calls. People offering their condolences about your father, saying they understand why I couldn't cope with what happened. What are they talking about?" My heart broke all over again. After 7 years of protecting her from the truth, it was all coming out anyway. Not through my careful consideration of the right time and place, but through the gossip mill she was now caught up in against her will. I had to tell her everything. About the affair, about Tabitha, about my decision to keep quiet, and about Imogen's betrayal. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she was quiet for so long I wondered if the call had disconnected. "Mom, all these years," she whispered finally, "you've been carrying this alone. Oh, my darling girl, what have you done to yourself?" She wasn't angry about the affair. She'd suspected something, she told me later. She was heartbroken that I'd felt I needed to protect her from the truth, that I'd sacrificed my own peace of mind for hers. "You should have told me," she said through tears. "I should have been the one protecting you, not the other way around." That conversation, painful as it was, became the first step toward actual healing. For the first time in 7 years, my mother and I were dealing with our family's truth together instead of me bearing it alone. We started family therapy, began having real conversations about my father, about trust, about the way secrets can poison relationships even when they're kept with the best intentions. The therapy sessions revealed layers of damage I hadn't even recognized. Dr. Pemberton, our counselor, helped me understand how carrying that secret had shaped every relationship I'd formed since. I'd become hypervigilant about trust, unconsciously testing people before allowing them close. The irony was devastating. In trying to protect myself from further betrayal, I'd missed all the warning signs that Imogen was exactly the kind of person I should have been wary of. "You've been living in survival mode for 7 years, Dr. Pemberton explained during one particularly difficult session. "Your nervous system never had a chance to reset after that initial trauma. Then, when you finally felt safe enough to share your secret, the betrayal re-triggered all those old wounds." My mother reached for my hand during that session, tears streaming down her face. "I should have seen it. Should have noticed you were struggling." "You were struggling too, Mom," I replied. "We were both just trying to survive." The ripple effects of Imogen's betrayal extended far beyond social embarrassment. I began experiencing panic attacks at work, triggered by the sight of clients whose stories reminded me of my own violation. Sleep became elusive, my mind racing through every conversation I'd ever had with Imogen, searching for clues I'd missed, warning signs I'd ignored. My supervisor at the charity, a kind woman named Dr. Vivian Cross, called me into her office on a particularly difficult Thursday afternoon. "Cordelia, I'm concerned about you. Your work has always been exemplary, but lately, you seem fragile. Is there anything I should know about?" I found myself telling her everything, about the secret, about Imogen, about the way my private pain had become public entertainment. She listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of sympathy. "What you've experienced is a profound violation of trust," she said when I finished. "In psychological terms, it's a form of emotional abuse. Your friend weaponized your vulnerability against you." Hearing it framed in clinical terms somehow made it more real, more valid. I wasn't being overly sensitive or dramatic. What had happened to me had a name, a recognized pattern. I'd like to suggest you take some time off, Dr. Cross continued. Not because you're failing at your job, but because you need space to process this trauma properly. We'll hold your position, of course. I wanted to protest, to insist I was fine, but the relief that flooded through me at her words told a different story. I was exhausted from pretending to be okay, from forcing myself to function normally when everything inside me felt shattered. The leave of absence gave me time to truly understand what had happened. I spent hours walking through London's parks, processing the betrayal with the help of my own therapist, a sharp woman named Dr. Helena Fairfax who specialized in trauma recovery. Betrayal trauma is particularly insidious, she explained during one session, because it comes from someone we trusted completely. It shakes our fundamental beliefs about safety, about our ability to judge character, about whether we deserve loyalty and care. Through our work together, I began to see patterns in Imogen's behavior that I'd dismissed or rationalized over the years. The way she'd always steered conversations toward other people's problems. How she'd react with unusual interest whenever someone mentioned family drama or personal struggles. The subtle way she'd probe for details, always positioning herself as concerned and supportive. She was grooming you, Dr. Fairfax said bluntly. Building trust specifically so she could harvest your pain when she needed fresh material. The calculated nature of it was perhaps the most devastating realization. This hadn't been a moment of poor judgment or a slip of the tongue. Imogen had systematically cultivated my trust over years, waiting for me to hand over something valuable enough to serve her purposes. But Imogen remained gone, hiding in the countryside while her handiwork wreaked havoc on my life. It was Jasper who finally told me she was back in London. Saw her at Harrods yesterday, he mentioned casually during our morning coffee ritual. Looking very tanned and relaxed. Apparently, she's been telling people you're working through some things and that she's giving you space to heal. The audacity took my breath away. She was positioning herself as the considerate friend, graciously allowing me time to recover from trauma she had inflicted. Did she say anything else? Only that she hopes you two can work things out eventually. Very magnanimous of her, really. Jasper's tone suggested he found her magnanimity as suspect as I did. That's when I made my decision. I was done hiding, done being the victim in this story. If Imogen thought she could control the narrative from a distance, she was about to learn otherwise. I started making calls, but not the angry, confrontational ones I'd originally planned. Instead, I began a careful campaign of information gathering. I reached out to mutual friends, to people who had been at those parties where my story was shared, to anyone who might have witnessed Imogen's performances. What I discovered was even worse than I'd imagined. Imogen hadn't just shared my secret. She'd embellished it, adding details that weren't true, spinning it into an even more dramatic narrative than the reality. According to 3 different sources, she'd claimed that I'd caught my father and Tabitha together multiple times, that there had been a violent confrontation, that I'd threatened to expose them. None of this was true, but it made for a better story. She'd also invented conversations between us that had never happened, positioning herself as my primary source of emotional support through the ongoing trauma. She'd told people she was worried about my mental health, that she was the only one I trusted enough to confide in. Most perversely, she'd begun suggesting that sharing the story publicly might actually be therapeutic for me, that she was considering staging some sort of intervention to help me process the trauma properly. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Not only had she stolen my story, but she was actively rewriting it to serve her needs while positioning herself as my savior rather than my betrayer. I documented everything carefully, taking notes, saving screenshots of social media posts where people referenced the story, building a comprehensive picture of how thoroughly she'd violated my trust and privacy. The research phase took 3 weeks, during which Imogen remained conspicuously absent from London's social life. According to Jasper, she'd extended her countryside retreat indefinitely, claiming she needed time to support a friend through a difficult period. Even from a distance, she was controlling the narrative, painting herself as the devoted friend making sacrifices for my well-being. It was during this time that I made a discovery that changed everything. While scrolling through old photos on social media, looking for evidence of the timeline of events, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in the background of a photo from a party 6 months earlier, long before I'd confided in Imogen, was a conversation I'd had with another friend, Portia, about family secrets and the burden of keeping them. In the photo, Imogen was clearly visible in the background, positioned just close enough to have overheard our discussion. Suddenly, her eager response to my confession 3 weeks later made horrible sense. She hadn't been surprised by my revelation because she'd already known, or at least suspected, that I was carrying some significant family secret. She'd been waiting, positioning herself as the perfect confidant, ready to receive whatever I eventually felt ready to share. The premeditation of it took my breath away. This wasn't opportunistic gossip. It was a calculated extraction of information from someone she'd identified as having something valuable to offer. Armed with this new understanding, I began to plan my response more carefully. I wasn't just going to confront her about betraying my trust. I was going to expose her for the manipulative predator she really was. Planning my confrontation took 2 weeks of careful preparation. I wasn't going to corner Imogen in private where she could control the conversation or simply leave. I wasn't going to send an angry text that she could ignore or delete. Instead, I was going to beat her at her own game. The opportunity came in the form of the annual fundraising gala for the Primrose Hill Literary Society. An event I knew Imogen would never miss. It was exactly the kind of gathering where she liked to hold court, surrounded by the sort of people who appreciated a good story and had long memories for social drama. I spent hours choosing what to wear, finally settling on a simple black dress that made me look both elegant and appropriately serious. I practiced my words until they came naturally, without anger or hysteria, but with the quiet authority of someone who had finally decided to take control of her own narrative. The gala was held at a Georgian mansion in Bloomsbury, all glittering chandeliers and champagne flutes. I arrived fashionably late, scanning the room until I spotted Imogen near the silent auction tables, resplendent in emerald silk and diamond earrings. She was, predictably, the center of a small crowd, gesturing elegantly as she told what appeared to be a fascinating story. Several heads leaned in to catch every word, and I caught fragments as I approached. Such a tragedy, really. The poor girl has been absolutely devastated. I've been trying to support her, but... Imogen, I said clearly, my voice cutting through her performance. She turned, her face freezing when she saw me. For a moment, I savored the genuine shock in her eyes, the way her practiced composure cracked. Cordelia! Darling, what a wonderful surprise. I didn't know you were coming tonight. The group around her shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing tension but not sure what they were witnessing. I wouldn't miss it, I said smoothly. Especially since I heard you've been telling everyone such interesting stories about my family. I thought it was time I set the record straight. A hush fell over our immediate area, and I could see other guests beginning to turn our way. Imogen's smile became strained. Perhaps we should talk privately. Oh no, I interrupted, my voice pleasant but carrying clearly across the room. I think public is perfect. After all, you made my private business public, didn't you? It seems only fair that I get to respond in the same forum. By now, we had a proper audience. Conversations had stopped, and faces were turning toward us with the unmistakable hunger for drama that only a society gathering could produce. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, raising my voice slightly to address the growing crowd, I'd like to share a little story with you. It's about friendship, trust, and the price of being interesting at dinner parties. Imogen's face had gone pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. Cordelia, please. 3 months ago, I made the mistake of trusting someone I thought was my closest friend with the most painful secret of my life. It was something I'd never told anyone. A family trauma I'd carried alone since I was 16. I thought I was sharing it with someone who cared about me, someone who would keep it safe. The room was completely silent now except for the soft clink of champagne glasses and the rustle of evening gowns. Instead, that person, my dear friend Imogen here, turned my pain into entertainment. She shared my story at dinner parties, gallery openings, charity lunches. She embellished it, dramatized it, used it to make herself the center of attention whenever her own life got boring. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. I could see shock, dismay, and more than a little excitement on the faces around me. Imogen tried one more time to regain control. That's not how it happened. I was concerned about you trying to get advice. From 17 different dinner parties? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Because that's how many times I can document you telling my story. Complete with dramatic flourishes and intimate details that you had no right to share. Someone in the crowd actually gasped. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out, and I realized that just as Imogen had made my story public property, I was now making her betrayal equally public. The funny thing is, I continued, my voice growing stronger, I used to admire your ability to draw people in with stories. I thought it showed that you were interested in others, that you cared deeply about the people in your life. It took me far too long to realize that to you, other people's lives are just material. We're not friends, we're sources. Imogen's composure finally cracked completely. You're being ridiculous. Friends talk to each other, share things. Friends ask permission before sharing deeply personal information, I replied calmly. Friends consider the impact of their words on the people they claim to care about. Friends don't disappear to the countryside when confronted with the damage they've caused. The crowd was completely absorbed now, and I could see several faces I recognized from Jasper's descriptions. People who had been at those dinner parties, who had heard my story secondhand through Imogen's performances. So let me be absolutely clear, I said, looking directly at Imogen but speaking to the room. For anyone who might be confused about how this friendship ended, I trusted someone with my deepest pain, and she used it as currency to buy herself attention and sympathy. She violated that trust repeatedly, systematically, and without any apparent regard for how it would affect me or my family. I paused, letting that sink in before delivering my final blow. And now everyone knows exactly what kind of friend Imogen Blackwood really is. The silence that followed was deafening. Imogen's face had gone from pale to flushed, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Around us I could see the social calculations happening in real time, the reassessment of allegiances, the mental notes being made about trustworthiness and discretion. In a community that ran on secrets and gossip, being exposed as someone who couldn't be trusted with either was social death. If you'll excuse me, I said politely, I think I'll go get some champagne. The evening is quite lovely, isn't it? I walked away with my head held high, leaving Imogen standing alone in the center of a circle of people who were no longer hanging on her every word, but rather staring at her with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. The immediate aftermath was electric. As I made my way to the bar, conversations buzzed around me. I caught fragments of discussion. Can't believe she would do that to a friend. Always thought there was something calculating about her. Remember when she told us about those people at her yoga class? Makes you wonder. The champagne tasted like victory, crisp and effervescent on my tongue. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. I'd taken back control of my story, exposed Imogen's manipulations, and done it all with the kind of dignity she'd never shown me. But the evening wasn't over yet. About 30 minutes later, as I was chatting with a group from the Literary Society about an upcoming book discussion, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Imogen was leaving, hastily, without the gracious social exit such events typically required. Through the tall windows, I watched her climb into a taxi, her emerald dress a splash of color against the dark London night. She never returned to another society event. Within days, word spread through our social circles that she'd not just fled the party, but was planning to leave London entirely. Her flat in Primrose Hill went up for rent within a week. The speed of her social exile was remarkable, but perhaps not surprising. In a community built on trust, discretion, and social capital, being exposed as someone who violated all three was essentially a death sentence. What surprised me was how many people reached out to apologize. Friends who had heard my story through Imogen's tellings called to express their regret for not questioning how she'd come by such intimate details. Several admitted they'd felt uncomfortable with how she'd shared the information, but hadn't known how to address it. I should have asked her if you'd given permission for her to discuss your family situation, said Beatrice during a long phone call. I feel terrible that I didn't think to question it at the time. The apologies helped, but they also highlighted something troubling about how we, as a society, consume other people's pain. We're so hungry for dramatic stories, for intimate details about trauma and betrayal, that we rarely stop to ask whether we have the right to hear them. Imogen had understood this weakness in human nature and exploited it brilliantly. She'd known that once she started telling my story, people would be too captivated to question the ethics of how she'd obtained it. The experience taught me as much about the audience as it did about the storyteller. 6 months have passed since that night at the Literary Society Gala, and my life has settled into a new rhythm. The gossip about my family has died down, replaced by other scandals and dramas. My mother and I continue our therapy sessions, and our relationship is stronger now that it's built on truth rather than my misguided attempts to protect her from reality. Imogen, I'm told, has moved to Edinburgh. Apparently, London society proved less forgiving of her indiscretions than she'd hoped. The consensus, according to Jasper, is that if she couldn't be trusted with a friend's deepest secrets, she certainly couldn't be trusted with anyone else's. I don't feel triumphant about her exile. If anything, I feel sad for the friendship I thought we had, and the person I thought she was. But I've learned valuable lessons about trust, about the difference between secrecy and privacy, and about the importance of choosing confidants who see your vulnerability as something to protect rather than exploit. My work at the charity has deepened, informed by my own experience of betrayal and recovery. I find myself particularly effective with clients who've experienced breaches of trust, because I understand viscerally how it feels to have your most private self made public without consent. And I've made new friends. Carefully, gradually, with appropriate boundaries and mutual respect for each other's stories. I've learned to distinguish between people who are interested in me as a person and those who see me as a potential source of interesting material. The other day, a colleague asked me if I regretted confronting Imogen so publicly, if I thought I'd been too harsh. I considered the question seriously before answering. She made my private pain public, I told him. All I did was make her public betrayal equally visible. Sometimes the only way to stop someone from controlling your narrative is to take it back and tell it yourself. Some secrets are too precious to share carelessly. Some friends are too dangerous to trust blindly. And sometimes, the only way to reclaim your dignity is to stand up in front of everyone and tell your own truth, in your own words on your own terms. I learned all of this the hard way, but I learned it nonetheless. And while I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, I'm grateful for the strength it gave me and the clarity it brought to my understanding of what real friendship looks like. Real friends hold your secrets like they're made of glass. They understand that trust, once broken, can never be perfectly repaired. They know that some stories belong to you alone, and that sharing them without permission is not just gossip, it's theft. Imogen never understood any of this. But then again, I'm not sure she ever really understood what friendship meant at all. As for me, I sleep better now, knowing that my secrets are my own again, and that the people I choose to share them with in the future will be worthy of the trust one place in them. It's a hard-won peace, but it's mine. And that makes all the difference.